Hello, and welcome to Gen Friends. We're so excited to have everybody here. I would like to start by introducing myself, the host of the show, Cheri Hudson-Passy, and I'm from Carolina Girl Genealogy. And we have Terry O'Connell, who is the Executive Director for the In-Depth Genealogist. Hey, Terry, how are you?
Good, Cheri, how are you?
I'm good. I'm glad you're here with us. And we have Mary Kucherati from MKR Genealogy. Hi, Mary.
Hi there.
Good to have you.
Great to be here.
And we have a very special guest with us tonight. We have Kathryn Lake Hogan from Looking for Ancestors. And I'm excited to have you here. She's going to talk to us tonight about Canadian genealogy and the things that she's up to. How are you doing, Kathryn?
Hello, everybody. I'm doing well. I'm excited to be here.
So get us started. Say that, at this point in time, I don't have any Canadian ancestors. That doesn't mean I won't find any sometime, but if I do, what's the first thing I need? What do I need to know?
What do you need to know? What do you need to know? Well, it's going to depend on when they came to Canada. I think a lot of times Americans don't realize there's a possibility their ancestor may have been in Canada, even for a really short period of time. So there's some things that you might want to look at just to kind of say, see if they're in Canada. So some immigration records. If you can't find your ancestor coming into the States, then you might need to consider that they may have come through a Canadian port of call. And then, especially if they're coming in through the eastern seaboards. So if your ancestor was expected to arrive at Ellis Island, Boston, Philadelphia, any of those eastern seaboards, for whatever reason, the ship could have been blown off course, those types of things. They might have put in port at Halifax and then, traveled overland or taken a steamer, to get back into the United States. But if they did come through that port of call in Canada, then there's going to be a record, and assuming if the record survives. So you might find them that way. There's some things to think about when you get stuck on somebody, you can't find them, those type of things. I would say border crossing records, which are a favorite record group that I like to use. People cross the border, for all sorts of reasons, and vacations. I noticed there seems to be a pattern with men during the Great Depression came up to Canada for work. So if you have tobacco farmers, any type of farming, I would look to see perhaps if they're in Saskatchewan, if they're in Ontario during the Great Depression, they might have been up here working for a short period of time, and they would have been granted access for about 4 months. And
really,
And
I have a missing great grandfather during that time period.
You might need to look in Canada. You might need to look in Canada, Cheri. And people think, it must be people just along the border states. No, I've seen examples where most of the men on a border crossing record were from West Virginia, tobacco farmers, and they were all coming up to a place called Delhi in Norfolk County in Ontario, because at that time, guess what was grown in Delhi? Tobacco, right? So they're gonna hire men, right, who know that crop to come and farm up here. And so, that's where you kind of have to do some little out of the box thinking.
Yeah, I love that. Oh, I am definitely going to look for him. I would have never thought Canada. He just disappeared. There's all sorts of family rumors about what he really did, but hey, maybe he went to Canada.
Okay.
Thank you. That's great. Now, I know that you've got a new project that you've started.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, I decided, hey, you know what? We need more Canadian exposure. We need some more exposure with Canadian speakers and Canadian topics. So I decided I'm going to do a weekly webinar series. And so I did it. I started about 4 weeks ago. It's called Genealogy with a Canadian Twist. It's every Thursday, I'm going to say almost every Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern. That's 10 a.m. Pacific. And it's on a variety of topics. It may not necessarily be about Canadian records or that type of thing. I wanted to kind of keep it broad with, with the subjects, but you're always going to get a Canadian perspective on it. So you can get my perspective or maybe the perspective of one of my guests, who I'm right now keeping it to Canadians right now. So, we talk about a variety of different things, and it's interesting. I'm really surprised that I'm getting people attending from Australia.
Oh,
I know. I don't know. I don't even know what time of night or day. I don't know what day it is in Australia. Maybe it's tomorrow in Australia when Friday in Australia when it's still Thursday here. But it's starting to pick up some steam. So I'm really quite excited about it.
That is really great. Now, I'm sure with all different types of research, the basics are the basics, no matter what. It's just that different record types. So are there different record types? Are the censuses different? Are there other things that are just different for Canadian research?
There are some things that are the same, and of course there are some things that are different. So, our birth, marriage, and death records are all at the provincial level, just like they're at the state level in the United States. We have census records, but ours don't go quite as close to the future like yours do, like 1940 for you. We go up to 1921. So those things are pretty much the same. Where you get into some differences are how to access land records. They're a little bit different. Some of your church records are going to be a little bit different. The names of the religious groups might be different in Canada than they are in the United States. Those types of things. And then, of course, our history. Our history is different than your history. And so having a general knowledge of Canadian history is helpful because a lot of stuff happened. A lot of stuff happened in Canadian history that was really cool, but people just don't know about it. And so, having that knowledge, and then, of course, some general geographical knowledge of Canada is helpful as well.
Because I think we think of, those of us who have never really been to Canada, we think of Quebec, think of like Vancouver. I mean, we think of like it's just those two places and there's nothing else in between. And I know like a lot of people in Europe think of New York and Los Angeles, and there's nothing in between. So your point is well made, that no matter where you're researching, you need to figure out the history of where you're researching and what happened there and how that affected your ancestors. Who else would like? Is anybody, Cheri or Mary? Do you have any Canadian ancestors?
Well, yes and no.
Yes and no.
Yeah. I'm thinking one line. So my great grandfather left New York and went to Canada in 1917, and I have his original records.
Oh,
cool!
It is very cool. Like I don't know if you can see, like the print is in red.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this one is his United States Citizen Certificate.
Cool.
So I have like some cool stuff, but I also have family from Quebec as well. So I do have a question though for Kathryn. When we talked about really quickly entering United States versus Canada, so my Irish line, I don't have their records coming in here. I don't have records of them coming into Canada. But I've heard that the reason many went into Canada was because it was easier to gain entrance. Is that true?
I've heard that too. I cannot back that up with actual fact.
But you've heard it. So.
But I think there may be some truth to that for two reasons. First of all, I've heard the rumor that it was actually cheaper to come through Canada than it was to come to the United States. So that's another reason why you might find your ancestor coming through a Canadian port of call initially, and then taking, a steamer or going by rail into the United States because it might have been cheaper. And then you have to understand that, especially in the 19th century and the early 20th century, Canada was very white and very British. So the number one group of people that the government wanted for immigrants coming into the country were people who were English, Scottish, and Irish. Those were the top tier people. And then before the First World War, it would have been people, German, Eastern Europeans. And then everybody else, are on the bottom tiers. So anybody that had a darker skin tone, so Jewish people, Asians, African Americans, they're the bottom tier of people coming into Canada. So that might be a reason why your people came to Canada first, Cheri, is because they would have been marketed to. They were actively, the government, especially like in the 1890s, actively sent people out to England and Ireland and actively recruited people to come to Canada.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay. I have to show you one more thing because this is
okay.
This is a permit to leave Canada.
Oh, interesting. I don't think I've ever seen one of those.
It's actually on my blog. I blogged about these all years ago, but it has his picture.
What's the date on that?
This is 1918. So it's almost
that's interesting because you're still talking wartime.
Yeah. He in 1917 he left, I believe it was the Hudson Falls area of New York. He left his wife and kids and went to New York, Canada, to Ontario, and he stayed there. He died there. He worked there. So I've gone to where he worked. I've gone to the addresses that I had. There were 2 addresses that could have been, like one was a east, one was a west. We didn't have the differentiating. So we've seen it all up there, and I loved it. It was great to go and do. So especially because he wasn't a Canadian, he was a U.S. citizen, and he kept that citizenship, and he's buried in the States. But I just have all this stuff here that was my grandfather's on him, and it's just cool to be able to pull it out and look at it. As Kathryn started talking, I'm like, oh, this is right under my desk. It's convenient.
You know where it is. You can pull it out. That's great.
Well, it's probably the oldest stuff that's original that I own.
That's cool.
That is cool. So permission to leave. I wonder if the permission to leave, it was because it was wartime and people were tracking who was coming and going.
And he was going for 2 days. He was going into Buffalo, and he had to list all these people and where they were from that knew him. Because they can identify him.
You've got his fan club right there.
Yeah, and then on the back, it's like stamped every time he left. So you can, I don't know if you can see all the difference.
That's great.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. That's cool. Do you know, Cheri, do you know if your grandfather served in?
This guy, he did not, to my knowledge.
Have you looked for him in the Canadian Expeditionary Force records?
No, because I didn't know that was a thing.
That's why we need you, see?
Okay, crash course for Cheri here. Okay, so Cheri, when I get done here, this is how you're going to spend the rest of your evening.
See, you won't be lonely anymore. Cheri's been lonely for until I left, so she needs something to do.
Right. So Library and Archives Canada, if you go to the military section on Library and Archives Canada, and it's pretty easy to find because in the middle section of the website, it'll say military. So you click on that, and what you're looking for is the Canadian Expeditionary Force, CEF. And the reason that you just might want to take a look and see if he perhaps served in the CEF is because a lot of American men actually joined the Canadian Expeditionary Force before the United States joined the First World War. So if you look at the time frame, Canada at that time was under, it was part of Great Britain. So when Great Britain went to war, Canada went to war. And so that was August, September 1914. And then when did the United States join the First World War? August 6, 1917. And I know that for a reason. Because I have evidence. I tracked a guy. He's actually kind of interesting. And he actually joined, made his attestation at the YMCA in Windsor, where I live, on August 6, 1917. And that was the day the United States declared war on Germany in the First World War. So there's almost a 3-year time frame between when the rest of the world was at war kind of thing and when the United States joined. So it was marketed to young men as, here, serve your country, and you're going to be going on an adventure. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, a young American man would have been hearing this as well. And so there's a possibility. There's always a possibility that he could have been in the CEF. And even if he isn't, then you can at least cross that off your research list.
Okay. I'm going to show you one more thing, because this is cool, and I don't think many people find this in their stuff. But this is a loan from the Canadian Bank of Commerce for $250 with $1.60 interest.
Wow.
Cool.
From 1947.
That's cool.
That is really cool. Wow.
They really held on to a lot of stuff, thankfully.
And he just kept going back and forth to Canada.
Yeah. I mean, I have some great pictures of so his children were young when he left. But I have some great pictures of when my grandfather was married and he was up there with his wife and, visiting and stuff like that. So it's kind of great to go back and forth between them.
Well, do you know why he went to begin with?
Well, divorce, not divorce. I haven't found divorce records. I'm assuming he didn't like married life.
Oh, I get you. Okay.
That's my assumption. I'm very leery on whether a divorce happened or not, because she is buried. The wife is buried 2 blocks from my house, conveniently. He is buried in Hudson Falls, Glens Falls area of New York. Both of their burials reference each other.
Well,
husband and wife. Now, her second husband is buried maybe a mile from my house at a public cemetery, where she's in the Catholic cemetery. So I just wonder if they just went separate ways, and she took on the role of wife as opposed to legally being wife. I don't know.
So do you know when she married the second husband?
I have no records of it. In the 1930s, he appears in the census as husband.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds like let's mutually agree to go our own ways kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then maybe for the sake of keeping up appearances.
Right. Exactly. We came from a new place. Nobody knows we're not really married.
Right.
To just be married here.
Yeah. That's what it sounds like. Well, Mary, do you have any Canadian ancestors?
I don't have Canadian ancestors, but I have dabbled in Canadian research for this reason or that reason. You wind up with some. I usually wind up with some newspaper story or something that I get fascinated by these people, and I research some complete strangers. But I was curious, Kathryn, about what you were saying about passenger lists.
Yes.
I have some of my husband's 1850s era famine Irish immigrants that I can't find. They settled in Ohio, so they could have gone to New Orleans and come up the river. That's another option for them. I haven't been able to find anything. But I was curious. I mean, the passenger list that we get from the 1850s, say James Ahern, age 22, laborer, born in Ireland. Well, there's 7 guys on the ship that fit that. Not to mention, the 27 other ships that came in that week. So I have no way of telling, even if I found a name on a manifest, whether that's my name or just the random happenstance. Are the Canadian passenger lists any more detailed than what we get from in that 1850s era?
Wow. Anything before 1865 is really hard to find, first of all.
Okay.
And that's because the ship manifest did not have to be kept by law. Okay. So to find anything before 1865 is
all right.
Good luck.
Yeah, they were all there.
I mean, there are some out there, and what mostly you'll see is a transcript, and there's no central location. Like Library and Archives Canada does not have, transcripts of those early ships coming into Canada, because by law they didn't have to be kept. So there's no jurisdiction over them. So you have to really dig for those. You have to have an idea of when they came to Canada, where where in Canada they might have, come to, where they might have settled. And it's all over the places. I've seen some transcripts on personally owned websites and blogs. Some universities might have them. You might find them on RootsWeb. Like, they're scattered everywhere. So what about
really newspapers? Did the newspapers report any of the ships or anything like that?
If you were rich and famous, like if you have, a poor Irish guy escaping the famine, they're not going to. They're not going to be printed in the newspaper. If you know the family and people that came over with your ancestor who might have died during that trip, I say that, or who were sick, you might find them in the Gross Ill Quarantine Station records and Library and Archives Canada. That's where you're going to find information about the Gross Ill Quarantine Station. And that was at the port of Quebec City. And because Quebec City was the biggest port at that time, and for most of Canadian history, it was. Everybody thinks people came through Pier 21. Pier 21, it wasn't until the 1920s. Before that, it was Pier 2 in Nova Scotia and Halifax. But if you have people coming further inland into Canada, they weren't debarking at Halifax. They were coming in, and they were coming through Quebec City. And so if anybody was ill, if they were sick, if they were thought to be sick, they would have been sent to the Gross Ill Quarantine Station. So if you have Irish, I always tell people, if you have Irish, it's at least worth a look just to see. You might find a relative to give you some more clues about your ancestors.
Okay,
that's a good way to do that. So I wrote that down too.
That's a great
the ship record is all I'm missing. I have them here. I have them there. I have nothing in between.
All right. I have another question about military. I have a guy that he served with the Irish Guards. Can you not hear me?
Yeah,
I can hear you.
Okay. He served with the Irish Guards in World War I.
Yeah.
Was well decorated. Came to America. And he was doing like PR tours in America during the war. And then he married a woman in Louisville. Marriage didn't last. But I find him in World War II. I've researched a lot of his son. His son was a World War II B-17 bomber. But this guy served in Canada during World War II. And I think because he was still a British subject, that's probably how he wound up with Canadian forces. And I found a little bit in the newspaper in the context of his son being MIA. But how can I find out more about his service in World War II? Okay,
so was he killed overseas, or did he survive World War II?
He survived, and I think he had a desk job maybe because he would have been in his mid 50s probably, so he was not
right. Okay, so in order to access his military records, you're gonna have to go into Library and Archives Canada and read through the information for the Second World War, and there's a place that you can write to access the military records, and it's kind of pricey. I think it's about $50 or maybe a little bit more. Don't quote me on the price, but it's a really long time frame that you have to wait in order to get access to them. You can get access to that file, but I've heard the wait is anywhere from 8 months to 18 months.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's a process that you can go through that you can apply, and as a direct line, descendant, then you can have access to those records.
He's a random newspaper guy.
Oh, is he? Okay, well, somebody, but just go with Mary. But even still, just go and look and see. Like I said, I forget what the requirements are. I think you can do it on behalf of somebody. As well as a professional genealogist, but just read through what the requirements are. But, and if it does get accepted, then you wait. And you wait, and you wait, and you wait, and you wait. And I was just actually this past week on one of the Facebook Canadian groups, and somebody wasn't saying, just kind of updating on people. I just got my grandfathers or great grandfathers, and they had waited about 18 months, and everybody was chiming in about how long they've been waiting, to get those military records for their ancestor. Yeah.
Is it a place that somebody can go into and get them?
No, you have to write. Yeah, you have to write to Library and Archives Canada, and then I think you can apply online, but you can't. Well, actually, you know what? I don't know if you can go to Library and Archives Canada and access those records or not. That's a really good question, Cheri. I would, so you know what? I would say definitely look on the website, because the Library and Archives Canada website is really good with providing lots of information, and they will have the contact information for Library and Archives Canada too, and you can always send them an email or call them and find that out. So, if you're planning a trip to Ottawa, then that would definitely be worthwhile to at least contact them beforehand to find out if you can access those records while you're visiting there.
Okay.
That's great. That's a good point. You've given us so many good tips tonight. Does anybody have any? Is there anything that you can think of that might help other people, or before we go, just some of your tips for doing Canadian research?
Okay, I'm going to give the number one tip right here. Okay. That's what I tell everybody. Canadian census records are online for free. Stop paying to access Canadian census records. And people laugh at me because I'm always talking about Library and Archives Canada, and that's because Library and Archives Canada is free. You can access a lot of information and actual records on Library and Archives Canada website for free. It's just a little bit of know-how on how to do that. And so the Canadian census records are online there. They're indexed, they're digitized, they're free. Stop paying those big subscription prices for Canadian census records. And then with a little bit more digging and a little bit more know-how, you can access census records going back to 1666, New France.
Wow.
Yeah, on Library and Archives Canada website, they have the digitized images. You can find transcriptions of those records everywhere on the internet. All you do is Google it. You'll find the transcription, and their actual images are on Library and Archives Canada for free. So a little bit of digging, a little bit of know-how, but some really cool stuff. And those are just really interesting to look at because, they're like 400 years old. That's kind of cool.
That is cool. 400
So I want to
years.
make sure I got this straight. We should check out Library and Archives Canada.
That's right. Check out Library and Archives Canada.
And how much does it cost?
It's free, Mary. There's no cost at all other than time.
Wait, there's more.
That's wonderful. That's great. I'm glad you made that point, because that is true. A lot of people do, go straight to these subscription sites instead of looking to see what they can find for free first. So
exactly.
They just assume that's what they have to do with their genealogy. So, well, thank you so much. It's been so wonderful to have you with us tonight. And Terry and Mary, thank you. It's the Terry, Mary, Cheri show tonight.
That's funny.
Kathryn, thank you so much for being with us and sharing with us all your tips for Canada. I'm sure that, Terry's got some great tips. She's going to be finding her because you've been on, and I'm sure you've helped a lot of people. And don't forget that Kathryn has started her podcast on Thursdays. Remind us again what time it is.
So it's webinars. Webinars. Yeah, free webinars. And it's Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern time. And
we will get the link. Right, Terry, we'll put the link for that on it so everybody can click and go listen to you and be able to learn all about Canadian research. And with that, I would like to thank everybody for watching, and please post any questions or anything that you may have, and we'll try to get back to you on some Canadian research. And we hope you'll join us again on Gen Friends. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.